had just moved into my new apartment a few weeks ago. It was a small one-bedroom place, but it was perfect for me. I didn't need much space, and the rent was cheap. The building was old, but the apartment had been recently renovated. Everything seemed great. One night, I was settling in to watch a movie when I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like something had fallen off the counter. I paused the movie and listened, but the noise didn't repeat. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the building settling or maybe the wind outside. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was louder and more distinct. It sounded like footsteps. My heart started racing. I lived alone and I knew I had locked the door. There shouldn't be anyone else in the apartment. I muted the TV and listened intently. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving from the kitchen towards the living room. Towards me. I held my breath, not daring to make a sound. The footsteps grew closer, and then I heard a creaking noise, like someone putting weight on the old floorboards. I couldn't see anyone in the dim light of the TV, but I could feel a presence. Someone was there, in the room with me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in fear. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then a voice spoke from the darkness. "I know you're there." It was a man's voice, low and menacing. "I've been watching you." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice continued. "I know when you leave for work. I know when you come home. I know you live alone." Tears streamed down my face as I realized the gravity of the situation. This person had been stalking me, watching my every move. And now, he was inside my apartment. I heard the footsteps again, moving closer to the couch where I sat. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for what was to come. But then, I heard a loud bang from outside the apartment. The footsteps stopped abruptly. I opened my eyes to see a flashlight beam shining through the window. "Police! Open up!" a voice shouted from outside. The footsteps retreated quickly, moving back towards the kitchen. I heard the sound of the window sliding open, and then a thud as the intruder jumped out. I ran to the door, unlocking it with shaking hands. 2 police officers rushed in, their guns drawn. "Are you all right?" one of them asked me. I nodded, unable to speak. They searched the apartment, but the intruder was gone. The officers took my statement and assured me they would do everything they could to find the person responsible. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Knowing that someone had been watching me, had been inside my apartment, made me feel violated and unsafe. I moved out of that apartment the next day, but the memory of that night still haunts me. The feeling of being watched, of not being safe in my own home, is something I'll never forget. I had been living alone in my grandparents' old farmhouse for about 6 months when it happened. The place was way out in the country, surrounded by cornfields and not much else. I loved the peace and quiet, the way the floorboards creaked, the musty smell of the books lining the shelves. It was like stepping back in time. One evening, I was curled up on the couch reading when I heard a loud bang from somewhere outside. At first, I dismissed it as a fallen branch, or maybe a raccoon getting into the trash cans. But then it happened again, and again. It sounded like it was coming from the back porch. I dog-eared my book and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. The porch light was on, casting a dim yellow glow, but I couldn't see anything unusual. Just the old rocking chair swaying slightly in the breeze. I was about to turn away when I noticed something else. The door leading from the porch into the kitchen was ajar. Just a crack. But I was sure I had locked it. I always locked it. My heart started to race as I reached for my phone, thinking I should call someone. But who? The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, and the police would take forever to get out here. I took a deep breath and grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the umbrella stand by the front door. Then, I crept towards the kitchen, my socks silent on the hardwood floor. I pushed the door open with the bat, wincing as it creaked on its hinges. The kitchen was dark and quiet. the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. I fumbled for the light switch with shaking fingers. Click. The fluorescent bulb flickered to life, buzzing softly. Everything looked normal. The dishes were stacked neatly in the drying rack, the counters wiped clean. But then I saw it. Muddy footprints leading from the back door to the hallway. Someone was in the house. I tightened my grip on the bat and followed the footprints, my breath coming in shallow gasps. They led down the hall, past the bathroom, and up the stairs, towards the bedrooms. I hesitated at the bottom of the staircase, my knuckles white on the bat. I could just leave, get in my car and drive, until I had cell service, call for help. But what if they were still up there, waiting for me? I climbed the stairs as quietly as I could, avoiding the spots that always squeaked. The footprints were fainter now, but I could still make them out in the dim light from the window at the end of the hall. They stopped at the closed door of the guest bedroom, the room that used to be my mother's before she passed away. I hadn't been inside in years. I took a deep breath and kicked the door open, bat raised to swing. But the room was empty. The bed was made, the curtains drawn. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. And then I saw the closet door, slightly ajar. The footprints led right to it. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears as I approached it, reaching out with a trembling hand to pull it open. I braced myself for an attack, but none came. The closet was empty too, except for a few moth-eaten dresses and a single shoebox on the shelf. I picked up the box with shaking hands and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I unfolded it carefully, my heart still racing. It was a letter, written in my mother's looping script. "My dearest," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, but know that I'll never really leave you." As I read on, tears streaming down my face, I sank to the floor. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe she was still here, watching over me. The floorboards creaked behind me, and I spun around, still clutching the letter. There was no one there, but I could have sworn I caught a whiff of her perfume. Lilacs and vanilla. I wiped my eyes and stood up, looking around the room with new appreciation. This was her house too. Our house. And I knew I would never truly be alone here. I turned off the light and walked back downstairs, leaving the bat leaning against the wall. I had a feeling I wouldn't be needing it anymore. As I curled up on the couch with my book, I swear I could feel her presence, comforting and familiar. I smiled to myself and turned the page. I was home. I got home late that night, exhausted from a long shift at the hospital. It was after midnight, and the street was dark and quiet. I remember the sound of my key turning in the lock seemed unnaturally loud. As I stepped inside, I had that immediate sense that something wasn't right. Call it intuition or whatever you want, but the air in the house felt different. Stale, almost. I chalked it up to fatigue and my overactive imagination. I locked the door behind me, hung up my coat, and headed straight for the kitchen, flicking on lights as I went. I opened the fridge, more out of habit than actual hunger, and that's when I noticed it. A smell. Faint, but unmistakable. Cigarette smoke. Now, I live alone and I don't smoke. Never have. So the idea of that scent being in my house, at that hour, instantly put me on edge. I closed the fridge and stood still, straining my ears for any out-of-place noises. The house remained silent, but the smell was still there, lingering like an uninvited guest. My heart started to pound as my mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe it was coming from outside, drifting in through a window. But it was the middle of winter. Everything was locked up tight. Could it be the neighbors? We shared ventilation, but this seemed too strong for that. I grabbed a knife from the block on the counter, feeling slightly foolish, but needing the reassurance of something solid in my hand. Slowly, I made my way through the house, checking each room, closet, any place a person could conceivably hide. Everything was as it should be, undisturbed, familiar, but that smell followed me, growing stronger the closer I got to the bedrooms. By the time I reached the door to the spare room, my hands were shaking. I never went in there. It was more for storage. Boxes of off-season clothes and sentimental junk I couldn't bring myself to throw away. I turned the handle, the click of the latch, unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. I took a breath, pushed the door open, and fumbled for the light switch. The room was empty. Of course it was. Just dusty boxes and furniture draped in sheets. But the smell. It was overpowering here. The staleness mixed with the acrid tang of cigarettes. And then I saw it, there on the windowsill. A cigarette butt, lipstick stained and burned down to the filter. It hadn't been there before, so I was sure of it. I always kept that window locked, but now it was open. Just a crack. Just enough for someone to slip through. Someone had been here, inside my house. While I was gone, they'd made themselves comfortable. Smoked a cigarette in my spare room, like they had every right to be there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up till dawn with all the lights on, the knife never leaving my side, jumping at every creak and groan the old house made. Rationally, I knew they were gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling of violation, the sense that my home, my sanctuary, had been tainted. I had the locks changed the next day, installed a security system, but it didn't help. Because now, every time I come home, every time I unlock that door, a part of me still expects to catch a whiff of cigarette smoke. A part of me wonders if they'll be there, waiting for me in the spare room, making themselves at home in my space, my life, and I don't know if I'll ever shake that feeling. I was house-sitting for my aunt and uncle while they were on vacation in Europe. They lived in this big old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. It was a beautiful place, but it always gave me the creeps, especially at night when the wind would whistle through the eaves and the floorboards would creak. I had just settled in for the evening, curled up on the couch with a book and a mug of tea, when I heard a noise from the back of the house. It sounded like a door opening and closing. I froze, listening intently, but the house was silent. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination and tried to focus on my book. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was unmistakable. The back door had definitely opened and closed. My heart started to race as I set my book down and stood up slowly. I crept towards the kitchen, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I got closer, I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was trying not to make too much noise. I peeked around the corner into the kitchen and saw a shadowy figure moving near the back door. I couldn't make out any details in the darkness, but I could tell it was a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. I must have made a noise, because suddenly he turned and looked right at me. I ducked back behind the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. I heard his footsteps coming closer, and I knew I had to do something. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and dialed 911, but before I could hit send, a hand clamped over my mouth and an arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me back against a solid chest. "Don't scream," a deep voice whispered in my ear. "I'm not going to hurt you." I struggled against his grip, but he was too strong. He dragged me back into the living room and pushed me down onto the couch. I looked up at him, trying to see his face, but it was still hidden in shadow. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I just need a place to lay low for a little while," he said. "I don't want any trouble." "Then why break in? Why not just knock on the door like a normal person?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let's just say I'm not exactly a normal person. We sat there in silence for a moment, me on the couch and him standing over me. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. Finally, he spoke again. "I'm going to let you go now," he said. "But if you try to run or call for help, I'll have to stop you. Do you understand?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He released his grip on me and stepped back. I sat up slowly, rubbing my arms where he had held me. "I'm going to be here for a few days," he said, "just until the heat dies down. You're going to go about your business like everything is normal. And if anyone comes looking for me, you're going to tell them you haven't seen anyone. Got it?" I nodded again, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was this man? What had he done? And how was I going to get out of this situation alive? For the next 3 days, we existed in an uneasy truce. He stayed mostly in the guest room, only coming out to use the bathroom or grab something from the kitchen. I tried to act normal, but I was constantly on edge, jumping at every little noise. I didn't know what he was capable of, and I was afraid to find out. On the 4th day, I woke up to find him gone. The guest room was empty, the bed made like no one had ever been there. I searched the whole house, but there was no sign of him. It was like he had never existed. I never did find out who he was or what he wanted. But I'll never forget those 3 days of living in fear, never knowing what was going to happen next. It's an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. I had just moved into my first apartment on my own. It was a small studio in an older building, but the rent was cheap and the location was perfect for my new job downtown. I didn't have much furniture yet, just a mattress on the floor, a folding table and chair, and a few boxes of clothes and kitchen stuff. It was my first night there, and I was exhausted from moving all day. I didn't have curtains in the windows yet, so the streetlights cast strange shadows on the walls. I tried to ignore them and fall asleep, but every creak and groan of the old building made me jump. I told myself it was just settling, that all the sounds were normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a loud thump from the apartment above mine. I sat up, heart pounding, listening intently. I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, pacing back and forth. Then another thump, like something heavy being dropped on the floor. I got up and looked out the window, but the street was empty and quiet. I tried to go back to sleep, but the noises continued. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It sounded like furniture being moved, but who would be rearranging their apartment in the middle of the night? I pulled the thin blanket over my head, as if that could block out the sounds, and eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning I was groggy and irritable from lack of sleep. I brewed some coffee and ate a granola bar, trying to shake off the weird night. I had to get to work, so I quickly got dressed and headed out, locking the door behind me. As I turned to go down the stairs, I nearly ran into an old woman coming out of the apartment above mine. "Oh, excuse me," I said, startled. "I didn't see you there." She looked at me with watery blue eyes, her face heavily lined. "You're the new tenant downstairs?" Her voice was raspy, like she hadn't used it in a while. "Yes, I just moved in yesterday. I'm Sarah," I said, trying to be friendly despite my exhaustion. "I heard you," she said, her gaze uncomfortably direct. "Last night, moving around, making noise." I blinked, confused. "No, I wasn't making any noise. I thought I heard you, actually. Moving furniture or something?" Her expression hardened. "I live alone. I wasn't moving anything." An uneasy feeling crept over me. "But I heard thumping and dragging sounds from your apartment. It kept me up half the night." She leaned closer to me, and I caught a whiff of mothballs and stale coffee. "There's no one up there but me. And I didn't hear anything last night. Nothing at all." She held my gaze for a moment longer, then turned and shuffled slowly back into her apartment, closing the door firmly behind her. I stood frozen on the landing, my mind racing. If she wasn't the one making those sounds, then who was? I barely remembered my commute to work that day. I was preoccupied with the mystery of the nighttime noises, turning it over and over in my mind. I tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the building's old pipes or the wind rattling the windows. But deep down, I knew what I had heard. Those heavy, deliberate footsteps. The distinct sounds of large objects being moved. When I got home that evening, I stood outside my apartment door, key in hand, hesitating. I didn't want to go inside. The thought of spending another night alone in there, listening to those unexplained sounds, filled me with dread. But I couldn't afford a hotel room or another apartment. I had nowhere else to go. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door, bracing myself. But as I stepped inside, I froze. There, in the middle of my apartment, was an old steamer trunk. Battered and covered in peeling leather, it stood out starkly against the bare walls and floor. It hadn't been there when I left that morning. I was sure of it. Someone had been in my apartment while I was gone, and they had left this thing behind. With shaking hands, I approached the trunk. I had to know what was inside. What if it was a clue to who had been in here? Or worse, what if it was something more sinister? I reached for the latch, my heart in my throat. But before I could touch it, a heavy thump sounded from the ceiling above me. Then another, and another. Thump. Drag. Thump. The footsteps had started again, but this time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know who, or what, was making them.